Back to the Nutrimedical Report. Our scientist, Ann Morrison, is here. And, of course, Ann, I congratulate. She's working with one of our gentlemen that listens to the program. Is an amazing guy, Jim, and he's going to be helping Ann set up a remarkable science news blog, which we'll post up a direct link on our website. I think there'll be a small monthly fee for you to actually get access to a full range of information, but I think that this is important that people get high-quality scientific analysis of everything from space weather to plagues to lots of other scientific topics. Again, this is our science, astrophysics, civil defense, and prepper hour. And when our astrophysicist, Professor McKenney, I've actually had him on earlier in the week on the first hour on Tuesday. He actually, I spent, I think, a few minutes to several minutes, many minutes, every day this week talking about very important topics. So, Ann, I'm sure you have lots of topics to open up today. Let's start from the top.
All right. Well, we have a person that appears to have Ebola. It was somebody who was working in Guinea in West Africa, and he apparently has the Makona virus. And
really?
And that's the Ebola Makona virus. And he has been hospitalized there. Now, the Germans have had a lot of success, and what they're treating him with is and you probably know what this is a hemipurifier. So it's a device outside his body that filters the blood and can remove viruses and other sources of infection. And it had worked last on a patient after he had even experienced multiple organ failures. So this man is hospitalized in Germany. It doesn't say he's a German citizen, and they think that they'll be able to cure him of the Ebola that he has acquired after working in Guinea.
Yeah, the other things that I can recommend that they could actually, if they're listening, should do is intravenous vitamin C. Or our oral through a feeding tube, Power C+, and the things that will block the receptor binding domain are catechins. Our polyphenol and NutriDefense is the most powerful blocker of the receptor binding domain for viruses available, and it will block almost completely all virus receptor binding domains for any virus. So NutriDefense has the polyphenol catechin. We also have the other catechins that are available, Green Tea Select, and those are very, very powerful. The other thing is high-dose vitamin D. And we're talking about little dosages. We're talking about 60 units to 100 units in 1 or 2 days will actually block the receptor binding domain, and I recommend Micelle D3. And we're talking about really high dosages. We're not talking about for a long time, but for a couple of days. And then Myco D2, which is not only the vitamin D2 because it blocks the receptor binding domain, but the Power C, full vitamin K2, menaquinone 7, along with these blockers work really well. And if they use that along with the pheresis, it'll help dramatically in stopping the virus. And then our antipathogenics, the Nutriodine, Allison Med, and Silver 100, these are all major antipathogenics. In fact, I want to report that our Liberia clinics and doctors, as well as all the villagers that received our Nutriodine, not one person, not one of our Ragma ministry people or the villagers got Ebola, not one. So we sent 300 plus vials over in January, and not one was infected with Ebola. Pretty good.
That is quite a record, and
yes.
I hope somebody publishes that in a paper someplace.
Well, I think what's going to happen is it's going to be a verbal report from the Ragma Ministry people. I want to get when Tom Strader, who's actually our MG12 CEO, his brother is actually a PA over there, and he's the one who actually facilitated this. We actually transported it to their MG12 offices in North Carolina, and then they shipped it directly over to Ragma Ministries in Liberia. That's how we managed to do that. So that's pretty exciting to see that. And of course, the same thing deals with any plague, whether it's H5N1. For example, I tell people H5N1, why don't we have, for example, the use of Nutriodine or Allison Med in some kind of form to put in chicken feed so that the virus can't replicate in chickens. The simplest would be to simply add Nutriodine, and you add so many drops to their chicken feed, and basically the virus couldn't infect the chickens or turkeys, and they wouldn't need to be taking antibiotics to keep them from getting close quarters, Staph aureus, and other infected bacteria, because a lot of these animals are treated so poorly. They have depressed immune systems, and they're sitting ducks for these wild pathogens that'll get into when you get beard droppings in their yard, because they're often put out in the yard outside their turkey areas. And some of these states, for example, the state of Minnesota is, we call, the turkey capital of the world. There's more turkeys growing in Minnesota than anywhere else on the planet, but it's also the place of 10,000, not 1,000, but 10,000 lakes, literally. And when you have that many flying ways of birds crossing over Minnesota, which is one of the central flyways in North America, you're going to have wild virus that's going to infect your animals. It's just, you've got to do better than what we're doing right now.
Well, what they're reporting in the newspapers and I'm really messing the name up. Recombinamics.
Yeah, the Henry L. Nyman's. Yeah.
Their scientific website, and what they're reporting is that this flu is a Fujian strain. Now, I had talked earlier about the EA, the Eurasian strain, and the AM, the America strain, but they're saying this H5N2 is the Fujian strain of H5N2, and Fujian, I don't know, but I thought that was an EA strain. So I'm a little confused now about what they think we have. And also they seem to indicate that it's coming up the flyway, that the bird migration coming north on the Mississippi flyway is almost over, but that it came up from Mexico. So I'm a little confused, because I thought that they were trying to tell us it was going south, and instead they're saying it's coming north. Anyway, they have a lot of H5N2 outbreaks, and they have asked the workers, the poultry workers, to take Tamiflu. They keep telling the public that it doesn't affect people, but at the same time they're telling the workers, we'll take the Tamiflu because we don't want you to get sick. So does it make people sick? Well, we're getting contrasting information on that. We do have it, they're worried about it coming now into Missouri. At first it was in Minnesota, and there's a lot of farms in Minnesota that have it, and some of them are large farms, and then in Iowa, and now it's coming into Missouri. So they're saying that although confirmation in Lewis County, Missouri, was made on May 4th, but the last reported poultry cases was March 10th. So you're talking almost 2 months later. And
wow.
Why it's like that, I don't know. But what they think is that wherever it was introduced, they think now that it has spread to the resident wild birds. And I have made the case here in the town that I live in that you don't want non-migrating geese or ducks. I mean, they look pretty on the pools or in the fountains or whatever, but you don't want them there, because if you have non-migrating geese and ducks, then what happens is they pick up the H5N2, and they may not die from it, but they'll pick it up and then they'll spread it to the poultry holdings. So that's one thing that people can work on, is getting rid of non-migratory geese and ducks. And I don't know how my city did it, but they did it.
And
anyway,
what technology do they use to get rid of the non-migratory birds?
Well, they just find people who keep them, and pretty soon the people get rid of them.
Ah, okay. Wow. Gosh.
Yeah.
So, we have lots of other things going on. Professor McCanny's here, but we want to continue with some of our science news with Ann. You've got lots of stuff here. Wow. Space station refueling crafts is out of control and plunging to Earth. Filament magnetism.
It has plunged to Earth now.
Yeah. Wow. Back in a minute. Professor McCanny's here, waiting in the wings to pop in. We have some amazing discussions this week. And by the way, when I went through there's that special link. If you go on the top of the announcements page, there's a special sublink there. Put that sublink directly that's in that link on that page there with the announcement picture. It says Planet X Comments and Earth Changes. into your browser. When you hit it, you're going to get a subpage. It'll give you links to all the amazing books, DVDs, videos, and other materials. And Professor McKinney, I got to tell you, you cover things that nobody else on television, radio, or anywhere else touches. There is nobody like you on the planet. I mean, not even remotely. A lot of people try to touch on it, but there isn't. And the fact is, you're talking about Tier 1 science and about planet-forming activities, about the danger of cataclysmic things, for example, like Planet X or comets. And you also propose scientific theories, like your theory about the redshift due to to things passing, for example, Jupiter, or shifted in the other direction, upward in frequency, passing Saturn. You explained to me that when you propose these and the scientists check it and they get the data that confirms your theory, they're boggled and they don't want to give you credit. That's what I always get a kick out of. They don't want to give you credit for proving that some of their theories, which proves that even the big holes in special relativity, are not correct, which I find humorous, but it's also very sad, because it means a lot of scientists out there are not really scientists. I call them scientistic. They're science-like, but they're a better term would be calling them science-light, L-Y-T-E. They're not really scientists, because the scientists will find an anomaly that literally throws out their previous theories or makes them have to rethink, what am I doing? So if you're a good CERN scientist working on the Hadron Collider, you're going to try to get data sets that's going to blow apart your previous theories about time-space and about mapping out the galaxy's wormholes, because if we're going to become a galactic transport civilization interacting with other advanced cultures across the cosmos, we have to map out the wormholes to be able to transport across time-space at a speed that's above light speed in order to be able to have an actual trade pattern. And people need to realize this is where we're going. In the 21st century, we will become a galactic civilization. And we also have to be aware that there's cataclysmic things that can happen to our planet. We have to prepare for them, not just diving underground with a small segment of our global satanic elite. We have to preserve the entire planet and our biosphere, which we are doing a very, very poor job because they're hiding Tier 1 science. So let's get back to Ann for her news reports first, and then we're going to dive in probably at the bottom of the hour. And I think you'll be driving the rest of the half of the other two segments, Professor McCanney. And let's go through some more of your news reports. But by the way, when you set up your blog, these will all be on your blog, and we're going to expand them dramatically, I guess, with a lot of text and news amplification on your blog. So let's go through some more of the news items.
Well, okay. I really want to go to seismic activity, because we've had an uptick in the number of earthquakes, large earthquakes, and volcanoes. And we had another 7.2, which was on the western side of the Pacific, and it may have created a tsunami because we had big waves generated off the west coast of North America. There were surfers that were wiped out in Mexico and also in San Diego and Los Angeles counties. And they said that it was like being in a blender. In other words, the waves were coming from the currents were coming from all sorts of directions, and the waves were huge, and they didn't know how to surf them. I mean, these were the best surfers that we know about. So we had this. Well, they didn't say it was a tsunami. They said it was a storm off of northern New Zealand. But the problem with storms in the southern hemisphere is they don't cross over into the northern hemisphere, because the jet streams don't go that way. Once you get to the equator, they just peter out, and you're in the doldrums. So I think that probably there was either a landslide, an undersea slide of some kind, or an earthquake, and probably this one that was in New Guinea. There were two of them. One was a 7.1, and the other one just a week later was a 7.2. And, of course, we had the huge one in Nepal. Anyway, they're looking, too, we're looking at seismic activity, and they finally put some monitoring off of the coast, the northwest coast of the United States, on the Juan de Fuca Plate, and the seafloor off the coast of Oregon dropped 8 feet.
Whoa,
now,
that's a big deal.
That's a pretty big drop, and it could have alone, just by itself, created a tsunami. And they call that the axial seamount, because the axial seamount is on the edge of the Juan de Fuca plate. It's on the Pacific tectonic plate side of the Juan de Fuca plate. And what's happening is that Pacific Ocean tectonic plate is, of course, pressing and trying to go under the North American tectonic plate along all along the coast, but especially in the northwest. And that's one reason that the northwest part of the United States is actually rising. And that's because the Pacific tectonic plate is pushing under the North American plate at that point. Well, what's happened is it's pressing so hard, and it's not, the North American plate is not budging much. So it's formed this, there's a little, now I guess you'd call it a mini plate, called the Juan de Fuca plate. And along the edge of that, where the Pacific Ocean tectonic plate presses up against the Juan de Fuca tectonic plate, there is forming a ridge of mountains. And so one of those is the axial volcano, and that's called a seamount because it's not on land, it's underneath the ocean, and you can't see it. And they didn't have any instrumentation on it. I mean, they knew that the water was warm there, and they knew that there were a lot of earthquakes. But they finally got out there last summer, and they put some instrumentation. And so just this last month, they had some measurements that indicated that the seafloor there had dropped 8 feet. Now, 8 feet is taller than than almost everybody. Yeah. So it was a big drop, and they're saying that the reason for the drop was because there was so much magma that came up through that volcano, and so it disappeared from underneath the volcano, and so the seafloor dropped. Now,
well,
that's
you know about the
unusual.
dance. You know about the dance that the native peoples do. They're called the dance of the Thunderbird. And about literally 300 years, there's a major tsunami that strikes Oregon coast through the Cascadia subduction. And if you've lived up in the Northwest, and this is going to hit, by the way, Vancouver, Canada, all the way through Washington State and Oregon, this whole area is extremely unstable, and about roughly, not thousands of years, but every 300 years roughly, there's a major tsunami, and it literally wipes out entire forests, where forests literally drop into the ocean, and the tsunami rises up 300-400 feet and goes miles inland. So these events are not unusual, and they happen on a relatively regular basis every 300 years.
Well, that's right. And usually what they do is they'll go into like rivers or any inlet.
Exactly.
We all know that.
Again, and then we'll get back to some news from Ann. You had also on a news item here, system off southeast coast could turn tropical. We've got weird weather. Here in California, it's never been colder. January was hot. We had 90 degrees, 100-degree temperatures, and now it's in the low 60s at night. It's in the 50s here, which is really unusual because we're only 35 miles from the Mexican border in Vista, California. Professor McCanny, we had a lot of really interesting talks over the last week. And
yes, we did.
You're absolutely brilliant. I mean, and I love going back and forth, and I'm like a kid in a candy shop asking questions. Your knowledge of comets and planet forming and the lithospheric slip and pole slips and all these other things is amazing. And the fact is, this is a primary thing. What you talk about on your show, radio show, which we place links across to all your ebooks and videos and so on, which I tell people, if you're listening to this program, this material that Professor McCanny has and the blog that Ann's going to be putting up here shortly, this is essential reading. If they know this stuff, and by the way, this should get to the leaders of governments and people around the world that probably don't know about this, because even here, our congressmen and senators, I guarantee you, they don't have a working knowledge of this information that'll tell them why trillions, not billions, but trillions of dollars is going to black op projects for underground cities and all kinds of other things that have bifurcated technology into Tier 1 and Tier 2 science, which, by the way, is being taught to our children. Why are they teaching Tier 2 science? To control them. They don't want Tier 2 science to our public and to our people because it will change policy, which means we aren't just going to bifurcate and save a small segment of our society. We're going to save the planet from destruction from stupid and evil and self-centered narcissistic people. And you're one of the primary cures to that problem by providing good information about the real events that can cause cataclysms to the planet and we can start then looking at real science to fix the problem. So I want to thank you for that, Don Aaron, and Ann for all her hard work on her blog that she does every week with our show, and her new blog she'll have. So, Professor McKenney, let's talk about some of your latest works. You've got a new book out now. You've got lots of other ones. I want you to kind of highlight what you have available. And some of this material is pretty shocking, but it's solidly scientifically backed.
Yeah, well, the latest is actually a DVD. It's a downloadable DVD. It's my first effort into an e-DVD, completely downloadable. There's nothing to mail or send. It's over 200 megabyte download, so each individual gets his own FTP site, so there's no funny business.
Right.
But it's DVD number 4, and it's the first of a college, university-level astronomy, astrophysics, space science course. Right. And as an introduction, this is dealing with the restructuring of cosmology. This is mainly derived from work I did in 1979 to 81 when I was in the faculty at Cornell University. Right. And basically, general relativity is incorrect. So the black holes and a lot of the space-time warpage, etc. What I did is I restructured this, and I give the information in there that proves that this is correct. The experimentation that has been done. I could just give you a simple example. And these are things that only I saw and really was in the right place at the right time. The professors and the staff members, the astrophysicists who were working on this did not understand what they were looking at, so they never published it. But, for example, they had a satellite that was orbiting Venus. This was about 1979. And so they took a radio telescope and tracked this satellite. They knew exactly where Venus was as it moved around behind the sun in its normal orbit. And so they expected to see the bending of light due to the mass of the sun, general relativistic, very predictable, very, very, what would you call it? Just the bending would be very normal if given the prediction of the gravitational bending of space-time. But what happened was this satellite was bouncing all over the place, and of course they knew that it was not bouncing all over, and they didn't know what the data meant. Well, I was sitting there. I had already developed my theory for the induced electric dipole redshift, which showed that the surface of the sun was electrically charged. The corona, in fact, is a field of relativistic electrons orbiting the sun. And in that non-uniform field, it was very close to the sun, is very rapidly changing. So what they were literally detecting was exactly what I had predicted. But you can't talk to these people. They're just, they're stuck in their own rut. And there were other experiments, too, I describe in this coursework. Another thing I do in the course is to calculate, just very simple calculation. We know the solar output of the sun across the electromagnetic spectrum, and so there's basically the solar output. You can take that, and this is only the light. This does not include the proton output from the solar wind or electron or iron or any other species that are leaving the sun, and just take the light output of the sun and then calculate the cross-section sphere around the sun at 1 AU, the distance of Earth from the sun, and calculate that energy output. Now compare it to take the entire mass of the sun, do the E equals mc squared conversion to pure energy, and it turns out that the core model of the sun is incorrect. But take the whole mass of the sun, and if you try and convert that to energy, you see that the sun could not possibly last 1 billion years, let alone 4.5 billion years, given its current mass. And so the entire basis of astrophysics cosmology is just completely incorrect.
Exactly.
The core model of the sun doesn't work. When I was at Cornell, I talked to a guy named Hans Bethe, who won a Nobel Prize for the chemistry of the nuclear change, the growth change of the large the chemical species in the sun. the nuclear species. And I talked to him. I said, hey, the fusion is at the surface. And when you realize that, the sun has to be resupplied with hydrogen. In the mid-90s, when I was working with Russian scientists,
Right.
they were actually measuring the hydrogen input from the galactic field. And so it was a very productive time because they were measuring. These were atmospheric scientists. They were measuring, and they had no clue why the things were going on that they were seeing. They were measuring atmospheric electricity effects on Earth and in the upper atmosphere. And they got my work, and they just went crazy. They said, this explains everything they've been seeing. So they translated. We had daily classes where the Russians were translating my work, and we went back and forth with communication. And eventually, I'm not sure who got in the middle, but they cut off our communications. But a lot of fruitful work occurred, including a very interesting experiment that I have in my weather book. They took an X-ray detector, scanned across the sun, starting from the outside, and the first reading they took and measured, okay, then when you scan in a little bit off the limb of the sun, you're getting the X-rays from the surface plus a bit deeper. So you subtract off what you got from the first reading, that leaves you with the X-rays from the deeper part of the sun, and you keep doing this. And what they realized was that the deeper you go in the sun, the cooler it got, until you hit a core that was a fairly large, significant core, which was a cool planetary core in the sun. And so it completely disproved the core fusion model of the sun. In one experiment, it's described in my weather book. But anyway, just a few examples of restructuring of cosmology. And then how the solar wind comes out, how it...
That's important. Understanding cosmology, it will also tell you what you need to do to protect yourself. Now the interaction between the magnetosphere of the sun and the solar winds and the Earth's magnetosphere interacts to protect us from cosmic background radiation and X-rays. It also explains that every galaxy, 2.5% of the mass, is a supermassive black hole, and the stars are connected through what I call white holes. We can talk about that when we come back. Professor McKenney, I'm going to summarize. Bad astrophysics science given to the public and the policymakers is leading to bad galactic and cosmic policy by a global elite and the billionaire club, making stupid ideas like hiding in underground cities, hiding tier 1 science for energy generation. As I mentioned before, peak oxygen is a major problem. If you burned all the fuel in Venezuela, the world's oxygen concentration would drop to zero. And as the magnetosphere drops 5% per decade, and we're having the approach of large comets that are planet-sized like Venus, because Velikovsky got some pretty good evidence that I believe Einstein agreed with him, that Venus was a captured comet. It wasn't a normal planet that was formed with the early solar system because of many different anomalies. And you presented evidence that shows a lot of the special and general theories of relativity and bad, what I call astrophysics, I call tier 2 science, which a lot of it is pseudoscience, is leading to bad policy by the billionaire club that really don't understand the true astrophysics. And by the way, if you're listening and you're in the NSA or if you're at the university level in nuclear physics and astrophysics, listen up. Bad policy made by people spending trillions of dollars on stupid ideas is still going to get you killed. You're not going to live forever. Even with life extension technology, if a comet hits or you're entombed in an underground tomb, even if we have in 20 or 30 years zero senescent technology, it's not going to be available to you. You're going to die in an underground tomb, a sarcophagus, a deep underground, they call hotel sarcophagus. They should make a kind of a funny movie over it. So good policy, though, is going to lead to good judgment on the part of the nations of the world to preserve human civilization in the biosphere, just like we're letting Fukushima destroy the North Pacific, and so the orca whales aren't even singing anymore, the starfish are falling apart, and the smelt run's gone, the salmon run's gone, and the native peoples in British Columbia are paying for their own tests to look at this. Bad policy kills people and kills civilizations. And you're trying to put a good science, so we have good policy, because it's all, not just some, but all of it's driven by astrophysics and by bad science, isn't it?
Yeah, I was going to mention that these people that think they're going to go into a cave city, either they're going to die or they're going to have to spend the rest of their life playing chess with Dick Cheney. So what would be worse?
Actually, that's the Satan's idea of what hell is, playing chess with Dick Cheney forever and with life extension technology.
There you go. Until the oxygen runs out.
Exactly. Pretty funny. Ann, do you have any more news that you want to talk about?
Well, sure I do. Of course. So anyway, these big waves came over from New Zealand, and these were the biggest waves that hit Mexico, in Mexico's history, well, in the written history, probably in the last 200 years. And that's something that we need to be thinking about. We talk about these king waves that run over the islands now in Polynesia. That's because the water level of the ocean is higher than it was. And when there's a strong tide, it used to be that they'd get a king wave when there was a strong tide. In other words, when the tide was high, then they might get a king wave. But now they're getting them with every storm that passes. And I think that what we can say is that it's not just the islands in Polynesia that are getting these king waves. It's also the west coast of the United States. And I would call these waves the king waves, and they're going to change surfing. People are going to have to understand how they work and how you can, what you have to be aware of. Obviously, you don't want to be surfing them if they're a king wave, but if they're a regular wave, then it's probably okay. The other thing I wanted to talk about is, and I wanted to get your opinion about this. There was an oil train, and it derailed and caught fire in central North Dakota. And they had to evacuate the town, and they don't know what caused the wreck. But the derailment was the 5th this year in the United States and Canada. And the Department of Transportation has toughened the construction for the standards of thousands of tank cars that haul oil and other flammable liquids, but they haven't enforced it. And we're sending more oil to China by rail. It used to be that they would float it down the rivers, down the Mississippi River to the port of New Orleans, and then move it on to they would barge it down there, and then they'd move it on to tankers, and then ship it across. But of course, when you do that, you've got to go through the Panama Canal, and now the tanker ships are so large they can't go through the Panama Canal. So I guess I have two questions. I can either see this as we are shipping more oil and gasoline byproducts to Seattle by rail instead of sending them down by barge, and partly that's because the rivers are low. The Mississippi and the Missouri rivers are low, and the Columbia River is low. But
the draft of the barges. I used to work down in that area of the country. The barges have a draft of only a few feet, so they could still move it. The second thing, it's Berkshire Hathaway. It's the corrupt Democratic Party and the Obama government. And they get billions of dollars of kickbacks because it costs significantly more. It's $35, I think it is, per ton to move oil in a rail car, and it's only $5 on the XL pipeline, which would come from Canada and the oil tar sands in the Turner Valley. So it's all basically corruption. It doesn't matter if the water's a little low there. They still could barge it down. And the thing is that in 2017, the Panama Canal opens. It's opened up by the Chinese, and they're building a second canal that's going to be across Nicaragua. And the Nicaraguan is going to be more efficient and much larger even than the one across Panama. So that one will probably open up until around 2020 is what I've heard. So,
well, I heard the same thing, and I just wonder, though, there's been a lot of complaints about the fact that the trains are not carrying commodities. They're not carrying food anymore. They're carrying oil, and, of course, there's a fight now between the oil industry and the farmers about what's going to go on those trains. And I just wonder if you think that there may be some domestic terrorism going on. Because
It may
we
be.
have had
It may be. It's
derailments.
also incompetence. When I was first doing my biochemistry degree, I worked on the Canadian National Railway before I was working in the lab, and I can tell you, don't underestimate the incompetence of people that transport products. Now, the problem is in a truck, if you make an error in a truck and your load shifts, you end up flying off the highway and you get a car accident. If you do it in a train, you got an 80 or 120 car train loaded. Remember now, every car in a train can probably carry the cargo of, maybe 60 trucks. So, it's massively more, and then when you go one scale higher, when you go on a barge, you're carrying a lot more than even train cars. It's amazing how much can be barged down. That's why the major waterways can carry so much more cargo. Like, one of the things that opened up the United States in terms of industry in Ohio and so on, and the steel industry, is the fact they could barge it down the major waterways to the Gulf of Mexico and then to Europe or anywhere else.
Well, the Corps of Engineers says the reason that they haven't been doing the job that they have is because of the sequestration. They just don't have the monies to maintain the locks, and they don't even have the money to dredge the Mississippi.
Now, let's put it this way. If our country were run by engineers instead of lawyers, like in China, they would have spent $600 billion in infrastructure, and those locks would all be cleared out. And China is run by engineers. If you go over to China and talk to the politicians, you won't find a lawyer anywhere. In fact, it's funny when I talk to people like my friend Ron Klatz, who's the head of A4M. When he goes to China, he can't find anybody but engineers and scientists. When you talk to policymakers here, it's always some darn lawyer that has very little science background, and they're often trying to get an angle. And to be honest with you, it's like one of those jokes. They had a cruise ship that crashed, and there was shark-infested waters, and they pulled everybody out of the waters that survived, and they were all in three-piece suits. And they said, "How come all you survivors are attorneys?" He said, "Because I guess with the sharks, it's professional courtesy."
So we know so many lawyer jokes.
Exactly.
The other thing I want you to look at is the flow in the Columbia River. They have a lot of hydroelectric generators in the Columbia River, and they're not getting the flow they need in order to generate electricity.
Well, that's because they're blocking. They have a blocking high in the North Pacific, so the northern United States and southern Canada on the west coast are blasted with radiation from Fukushima. They're trying to block that weather systems. And if you look at the geoengineering of the planet, the maniacs there insert them into supercomputer models that are incomplete, block climate, and cause massive problems elsewhere, like in Sao Paulo, Brazil. The largest city in the southern hemisphere is in crisis right now, and they're doing it here to the United States because they're trying to block radiation, whether they won't fix the problem, which is just plain evil.